All right, YouTube. Some fellow YouTubers asked me to do a video of a montage of Frank Luntz, who's a Republican pollster who is a fraud. They asked me to do a video depicting how he is a fraud and how he changes his tune all night on the election night. Well, during my research, I ran into this video. This is Yahoo News election night, a panel, and this is the first 10 minutes of the panel and what they discuss. I did speed it up, so the talking will go by quicker because I don't want to really watch the whole thing, but the bias in it and just how they act, they guarantee, they are 100% positive that Trump lost the election. Like, this is extremely funny, and it's really boring. Not this part's funny, but the whole thing would be boring, I think, but I kind of want to watch it all just to see how they change throughout the night, because this is insane. This is bad. This is just as bad as MSNBC is. So, all right, I'm going to play it here, and wow, just wow.
Want to pick our friend Frank Luntz's brain if anything happened on your way to CBS? You stopped by here at Yahoo. So, Frank, I'm so happy to see you. Tell us what you're hearing and what you can tell us at this point.
So the first thing is that I actually don't believe it's over. Because, yes, the election is over, but the ramifications of it, what has happened over the last 18 months, are so significant. We have created divisions that are not going to be healed in the coming weeks or months. We have said things that hopefully some of these candidates regret. And even ourselves, not just us, but people back there, all across the country, the yelling and screaming about this election, I heard it today here in New York, is out of control. And I encourage people to see the segment from 60 Minutes from a couple days ago to really see just how deep it is.
I think people probably know that already, Frank, don't you? I mean, I think they're probably getting into fights with members of their own families. But we're going to talk about that in a moment. Come on, Frank.
Okay.
What do you know?
Okay. First is that of the people who went, and I'm going to speak in general terms because the numbers, obviously people are still voting and I don't want to have any impact on what that happens. But first, the negativity from both candidates is significant. A majority of Americans who voted today have a negative opinion of Hillary Clinton, but even more have a negative opinion of Donald Trump. That neither candidate, more than 50% for both candidates, felt that neither was honest or trustworthy, which is significant because that has never happened before. A bare majority of Americans think Hillary Clinton is qualified to be president. Barely 1/3 of voters think Donald Trump is qualified to be president. And in terms of the right temperament, that was the biggest spread of all. Just more than half of the public, of the people who voted, think that Clinton has the temperament to occupy that office, and only 1/3 believe that Trump did. This was not an election about policy. This was not an election about principles. This was an election about people and persona. And when that's the election, Hillary Clinton had the advantage. And as we will see through the night, that's how voters voted.
So you think his temperament was his Achilles heel, so to speak?
And it's everything about it. It's the language that he used. It's the tone. It was how he treated her. I think the debates were devastating for him, particularly that first debate. Americans don't want to see you interrupt. They don't want to see you say wrong when your opponent is.
I don't know that it's an Achilles heel so much as a goiter. I mean, it's like, it's just out there. It's he led with it.
And it had an impact on him. And in terms of what they were looking for, and this I find interesting, and then I'll turn it back to you. The number one attribute was bringing about necessary change, bringing needed change. That crushed every other attribute in terms of what they wanted. And yet, based on the turnout that we see, based on the numbers that we see, that did not help Donald Trump tonight.
Yeah, let's talk about turnout, because it's pretty unprecedented, especially among Hispanic voters, which I think is probably going to be one of the headlines of the night. What are you hearing and seeing in your data in terms of turnout?
Tremendous turnout for Latinos all across the country, and that's going to be the story tonight. In addition, obviously, to who won and who lost. It made a difference in Florida. It made a difference in Nevada. It made a difference in Colorado. The Latino vote was always a pro-Democratic vote, but it was a pro-Democratic vote by about 2-1. I think when all is said and done, it may be 3-1 tonight. And when you make up a higher turnout and a higher percentage of the overall electorate than ever before, that spells trouble for the Republican Party. And starting tonight on this show, no one will call me a Republican again, because I'm not part of this. I'm not part of that system. I'm not part of that negativity. This is not something I was involved in this year. I will leave it to others to explain and to try to get themselves out of this mess.
But Frank, it wasn't always, Latino vote wasn't always that tilted against the Republicans. I mean, George W. Bush did pretty well with Latinos twice in 2000 and 2004. This is the result of actions that politicians have taken that have had reverberations in the rest of the society, right?
And yes, and this is a vote between, and I'm going to use the most negative language because that's what voters say. It's a vote between the liar and the lunatic. And they have chosen or will choose later tonight the liar. And we won't ever use that language about it again, because that's the language of 2016, and we have to stop speaking that way. But you're right about the Latino vote, but it's not just that. It's also the young vote, which Republicans have had trouble with now for more than a decade. And frankly, it is also among upper middle class voters, which Republicans used to count on, and they can't count on them.
But we can't really separate this, right? Because when we talk about young voters, we're talking about a population of people that is now 43% people of color. So you look at people like the Jen Forbert survey at University of Chicago. They've been delving into this, and what they have shown is that there are real differences about how young voters, who tend to be browner, Black, Latino, Asian American, than the older population. So when we talk about millennials, we are talking about young people of color as well as young whites.
And I'm going to give you a statistic for them to show you just how different they are. We asked the question a few months ago, what type of economic system you most wanted for the country? Among millennials, 58% chose socialism, only 33% chose capitalism.
Which, given their support of Bernie Sanders, doesn't come as a huge surprise. And Katie Packer, what do you think when you hear Frank saying this? I know you feel very much the same way as someone who started the Never Trump movement. But, I mean, let's face it, there's a huge section, or huge segment of the population calling themselves Republicans who are gravitating to Donald Trump. So what's going to happen to the future of the GOP?
Well, just to back up for a quick second, I think on this question of socialism, I do have some hope that these young people, when they get a little bit older and they start paying taxes, that maybe, they'll sort of change their tune. But I think one of the interesting things about this election is this: we've had this idea that people kind of live in, maybe, they'll sort of change their tune. But I think one of the interesting things about this election is this: we've had this idea that people kind of live in silos, that women vote based on women's issues, that Latino voters vote based on Latino issues. And I think what we've found is that women are just as offended by Trump's attitude towards Latinos and towards Black voters and toward the disabled as they are about the way he treats women. And so all of these voters aren't just sort of looking at their core issues, but they're sort of looking across the board. And young voters are very concerned about how he treats women, how he treats brown and Black voters.
How he treats people with disabilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that
that's not just disabled people who find that objectionable,
right.
In other words.
And there are men who are offended by the way he talks about women.
Absolutely. And so I think it's sort of permeated the entire electorate. And I do think that the Republican Party is going to have to very, very quickly move to disavow Donald Trump. There were some that embraced Donald Trump because they felt like they had to do that in order to help down ballot candidates or for whatever reason, but were never really comfortable wearing that suit.
But what happens to his supporters, Katie? What happens to Donald Trump supporters?
I do think that there's a few different categories of Trump supporters. There's sort of the early Trump supporters that were always very rabid and enthusiastic. There are Trump supporters that came on with him because they were party loyalists and felt like you have to support the top of the ticket. And there are also Trump supporters now who just really, really hate Hillary Clinton. And so that was what drove them, but they never really were going to love and embrace Trump. And I do think that folks in those last two groups pretty quickly are going to move to distance themselves. And
having said that, doesn't the Republican Party though have to change dramatically in order to absorb those people? They're not going to be interested if the Republican Party doesn't change its tune. How will it change its tune?
And in 2012, if you remember, the Republican Party did an autopsy that they called the Growth and Opportunity Project, where they identified all of these things.
Mitt Romney told me in an interview his biggest mistake in 2012 was that he did not reach out more to Latino voters.
And he would say that today. And he would say that was Trump's biggest mistake and the party's biggest mistake by embracing Trump was distancing himself from those voters.
I was going to say, he not only didn't reach out, I mean, he alienated them, Frank.
I went to two different rallies.
Right.
And I really want to clarify. Donald Trump would come in and say there's 7,000 people waiting outside who can't get in. That's a lie. There weren't 7,000 people. There was nobody waiting to get out. The whole place wasn't packed. I'm taking photographs of all these empty seats, all this empty space. So he's just making things up from the podium. And everyone saw this. He's picking fights with the media. He's deliberately trying to antagonize people. And you know what? It worked for that small slice of the electorate that was loud and hot and intense. But it turned off other people. And I'm going to surprise you. One data I'm going to give you. The percent who strongly supported their candidate tonight, 47% of Clinton voters strongly supported Clinton. Only 39% of Trump voters strongly supported Trump. Her support was actually more intense than his.
His number hasn't really moved, right, Frank, over the last year?
And it actually, well, based on this, it's looking like Trump's going to do worse tonight than what the poll showed. So instead of this hidden Trump vote that everyone talks about, the shy Trump voter, I don't see it.
Really? Matt, you're not talking.
I'm listening. There's a larger disconnect here. It's not just about the Republican Party. I have a couple of thoughts, and one is, I've heard Republicans say the same thing Katie says, which is they will move very quickly to disavow themselves from Trump. I think it would be a mistake for Republicans to tell themselves that solves the problem. As you were saying, they've been through this process before. They have fed something in their own party, a constituency, that is making it impossible for them, if they lose this election, to compete nationally or to select candidates who can compete nationally. Then they need to think about, what the party's been doing and the message it's been sending. But I also think, larger, the American political system, some things amiss here. The New York Times did a terrific analysis. I think this was the most overlooked statistic, frankly, of the entire campaign. It was a terrific data analysis in which they said the percentage of people who voted for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton in the 2016 primaries was 9%. Fewer than 1/10 of Americans, fewer than 1 in 10 voted for either of those candidates. What you see tonight, when you send two candidates out there and say, America, these are who your parties have chosen, and the best you can do is half think one of them is qualified, and a third of them think one of these candidates has the temperament to be president, and a third of them think he's qualified, you have a process That is not creating an opportunity for other Americans to feel bought into politics, and it's not giving you your best candidates.
And actually,
clearly.
there are a couple of governors that are talking about this tonight, that they're afraid that the Republicans are now going to close off independents, because that's where Donald Trump did the best among.
Right.
Not hardcore Republicans. It's people who are not Republican who came into the party to vote for him. And they're scared to death, because if that happens, it means that only the most right-wing candidates.
Yeah, that's a good answer to this past election, to the last battle,
Exactly.
but it's a good way to get yourself a bad candidate next
We're
time.
always good at solving last year's problem.
But Frank, what to be apolitical for a moment, we've got this huge swath of disenfranchised Americans who are the non-college educated working class whites that have gone toward Donald Trump in droves. I mean, how can the political system, or how can politicians embrace those individuals and make them feel less alienated for the good of the country, having nothing to do with politics?
It's essential that Hillary Clinton, if she is the president, that she does that tonight. And she should speak to them explicitly and actually say, for those of you, not who voted for my opponent, for those of you who voted for Donald Trump, I know you're concerned about me. I know you're concerned about you. I know you're concerned about your future. I get it. You may not see now, you may not see that I have the answers, but I hear you. And I will seek to earn, at a minimum, I will seek to earn your respect going forward. I think she actually has to address Trump directly, because that's the only way that these people will
Stand by, because I know you're taking off, but I got a little present for you before you do. It's 7 p.m. Eastern, which means the poll's actually 7:20.